Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Navigating Trump 2.0. This, of course, the show that takes a look at everything that's happening in the nation's capital through the lens of the second Trump administration. And joining me this week, David Brody, CBN News chief political analyst, and Dan Andros, host of the CBN podcast Quick Start. Guys, the big news of this week, of course, the big, beautiful bill. It has dominated the headlines with most of Washington, D.C. off doing 4th of July typey things during the course of this week. Of course, at first, at the beginning of the week, it was the Senate. A lot of hand-wringing as to whether or not the Senate would be able to get the big, beautiful bill through, but they did. And then on to the House, where it took a couple of days. It took a long floor vote for it to finally come to fruition. But in the end, the House approved the Senate's version of the big, beautiful bill, 218 to 214. Two Republicans voted with the Democrats for the BBB. So, David, this is obviously a win for President Trump, a win for Republicans in Congress, at least the Republicans who liked this bill. And we'll kind of get into as we go on here. There were Republicans who did not like the big, beautiful bill. But how big a win is this? Let's just start off with President Trump.
It's seismic. And there's only one way to describe it. And that's how it is described. It is described by me, seismic. Let's put it in football terms. President Trump is Tom Brady. I mean, that's the truth. He is the GOAT. Now, the modern day GOAT, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln might have a few things to say about that. And I'm not necessarily comparing him in terms of historical presidents here, but I'm saying for what we have seen go down, this big, beautiful bill does not happen without President Trump. So that's why he's Tom Brady. I mean, he's basically, look, here's an analogy. This thing was dead in the water Thursday morning at about 2 a.m. There were 5 no votes on the rule vote. And then all of a sudden, and we can get into the machinations of this. I have individual reporting from certain Capitol Hill sources that I can get into as to what changed. But they flipped 4 of those 5 no votes on the rule vote and eventually got the final passage. And that came because of President Trump and Speaker Mike Johnson. So if Trump is Brady, then Mike Johnson is, take your choice, Walter Payton, Jim Brown, Emmett Smith, whatever, Barry Sanders. He's the star running back. And
he's Gronk.
He's Gronk. There you go. It's a 1-2 punch. Guys, we're all sports geeks and nuts. This is like being down 2 touchdowns in the 4th quarter with about 5 minutes to go, and they pull it off and win by a field goal. That's what this is. I mean, that's basically what just happened. But we can get into a whole lot more. But this is more than just a win. This is the biggest win of Trump's presidency. And there won't be anything bigger. I can't imagine. There just won't, because this is the agenda, whether it be the tax cuts, whether it be the border. Remember, the whole wall is now going to be finished. Whether it be energy, there's so much to unpack in this bill. The point is that this is the agenda overall. And let's be honest, some of it ain't that beautiful, but you take 80 over the 20, and that's kind of where we're at.
Dan, I want to get to you on this in just a second, but I do want to circle back on something David just talked about, and that is, how did President Trump manage to convince these Republicans who have been staunchly opposed to this bill because they were concerned that it would increase the deficit, that they were concerned about the spending in the bill, and that according to the CBO, the would go, I think they said the deficit would increase by over $3 trillion over 10 years or something like that. What do you think the president did? I mean, I guess his ability. He gets criticized for a lot of things, but when it comes to having control of his party and the people in it, and his king-making ability in terms of this big, beautiful bill, it certainly seems as though he did push this thing across the finish line.
Yeah, are you asking me, Dan?
Yes, sorry. I am.
Or John? Yeah, you're asking me. Okay, sure. More airtime. Great. I love it. So a couple of things. I spoke to 7 different Capitol Hill sources on Thursday, many of them actual congressmen and congresswomen. And here, let me give you the gist of what there are 2 things that happened here. First of all, President Trump basically promised executive orders down the road for some stuff that wasn't in this bill. So that's number one. Whether that be on some of the solar and wind issues as it relates to tax credits or tax breaks. In other words, getting rid of some of those tax breaks that are in place because of the Biden administration. A lot of the Republicans did not like that. So there's probably going to be some sort of executive order coming soon that addresses that. So that's number one. And number two, my reporting suggests, based on talking to certain congressmen and congresswomen, just to be clear, I can't name them, but they're high up there. They're saying there's going to be another rescissions package coming from the White House, which basically means this is money that's already been allocated by Congress but hasn't been spent. And so this is a way to dial back and get that money back. Basically, we're not going to spend it on X, Y, and Z. We want that money back. That will alleviate some of the concerns about we didn't cut enough spending in the bill. So those are the two big ones. There's others, but those are the two big ways that they were able to get some of these no's to yeses, flip some no's to yeses. Now, having said that, there is the kind of the overall arching point of this, which is Trump controls the Republican Party. Don't cross Trump because he's very popular within not just the MAGA base, but within the Republican Party, and they don't want to get primaried. As a matter of fact, Tom Massey, even though he voted ultimately no on the bill, he pleaded with Trump at one point during the negotiations to say, please stop attacking me and I'll vote yes. Clearly, he voted no at the end, so I don't think Trump ever promised that he wasn't going to continue attacking Massey.
All right, Dan, let me get your thoughts on this big, beautiful bill and what we saw over the course of this past week, specifically on the Republican side of the aisle, because everyone knows the Democrats were going to be against it. The arguments they're making that it would throw millions of Americans off of their health care with Medicaid work requirements and forcing states to pony up more of the money as opposed to the federal government to pay hospitals to treat patients with Medicaid, and there was concerns that would force some rural hospitals to close, and that was the argument that you heard from Democrats. So the unity around the Democratic Party was clear from the beginning, but they didn't have the numbers in Congress, and so the really interesting side of this was the Republican side and the differences within the Republican Party here. And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are about how this all shook out, this battle inside the Republican Party over the course of these last couple of months as the BBB was winding its way through the Senate and the House.
Yeah, I mean, certainly super interesting. And as David was saying, Trump clearly showing here on this that he is still in charge of the Republican Party. I mean, you think about just, I don't know, a few days ago, guys, or a week or so ago, when you had this sort of anti-war kind of contingent popping up on the right that we talked about, I think in a previous episode, but where, Tucker Carlson and all these people criticizing Trump on the Israel and Iran stuff. And then the polling came out on this, right? And so on social media, it was everywhere, like all these kind of the people that don't want any sort of war at all, or America engaging in, the isolationist sort of thing. And then the polling comes out, and it's Trump stuck to his guns on that one, and said no, Iran can't have a nuke. And then the polling comes out after all that debate splattered out online, and it was completely overwhelmingly kind of in favor of what Trump's sort of position was on that. So I found that to be very interesting and enlightening about where things stand with Trump and Republicans in general. So I think David was spot on with that on Trump's standing within the party right now. And it showed in this bill because there definitely are concerns. I mean, a lot of Republicans are leery of these giant bills and this giant spending. But as we've talked about before, when you have Trump, I think when he's at his best here is when he is going after the typical sacred cows of government spending that have been entrenched for the last 15, 20, 30 years or so from the left that Republicans have been too scared to go after, like cuts to green spending. I mean, these have been mocked online by Republicans forever. How many billions of dollars are we going to waste on solar investments that end up just failing? And then that money went to nowhere. And so cutting back on that, I mean, that is a leftist, all the energy stuff is a sort of leftist, almost religious type thing that they think is, it's basically paramount to their existence. And so they've always wanted to have those in there. And so for him to go after these sacred cows, I think it moves a lot of people on the right over to that. And so even though there is spending, and another thing I'm always leery on, by the way, in these big bills is when there's tax cuts the CBO and others will always project, well, where are they going to get that money from, without factoring in that, I don't know, when companies have to pay less taxes, there's more growth, et cetera. Like, they never seem to factor that in. So I always take that one with a grain of salt. But the border spending, you can also argue, yes, that is spending, and that's a lot of spending, but will that save us money in the long run, as well as keeping our borders secure for obvious reasons and national security reasons? So, I think it's super interesting, and I think David's spot on saying that Trump, rallying these Republicans and assuaging their concerns and making them come on board, I think is a big win for him.
I'm looking at some of the polling here on this, and there's numbers that really need to be nuanced here. As you look at the numbers and see what the American people think about this bill, Quinnipiac polling from June 22nd to the 24th found that 55% of voters opposed the bill, 29% supported it. Another 20% didn't have an opinion. But when you zero in on certain aspects of this, you find some different numbers. On the Medicaid work requirements included in the bill, which for people who are on Medicaid, there was provided that someone is able-bodied, that they're young enough to be required to work, they would have to work or volunteer at least 20 hours a week in order to continue to be qualified for Medicaid. And there's more specifics to that, but that's kind of the top line. On the Medicaid work requirements included in the bill, the numbers are more divided. 47% supported that measure, 46% opposed it. The Washington Post numbers from June 6th through the 10th have very similar numbers. 42% opposed the bill changing tax spending and Medicaid policies, while 23% supported it. But 52% said they supported the work requirements for low-income, childless adults to get health insurance. That's a slip of the tongue. I guess, Dan, I'll come back to you on this. My point is that this is such a huge, complicated, multifaceted, multi-layered bill that even as someone who has been following this and reading up on it and trying to really dig in on this bill, it's hard for me to sit here and say exactly whether or not I should support it or I should be against it. I mean, you kind of just have to look at whose policies are largely being satisfied here, and the different members of Congress that have been against the bill or been vocal about it. How much historically have you sided with them on issues? And if you have historically sided with them, well, then maybe you kind of drift into their direction, like the Thomas Masseys, Tim Burchett, the guys on the Freedom, the men and women on the Freedom Caucus who have been vocally opposed to it. I guess my big question is on the merits of the bill itself. How do we feel about this, given it's so big and complex?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, that's one place you can start and say, I know there's always been talk in the past of, can't we just make these bills and make a bill that says each bill has to be its own thing, like that we pass that instead of like jamming all of these things into one big, beautiful bill? Can't we simplify things and make it easier? But I think there's no simple answer to that, John. I mean, I think you're going to find things that you like in it. And then you're going to find things you don't like in it. I mean, especially from the Republican side of things, I think you're going to be able to find plenty of things that you like and then things that concern you. And I mean, is there enough in there to sort of get conservatives who are leery on this spending to be saying, hey, is there any encouraging of fiscal restraint here in this bill that can kind of assure me going forward that this isn't just going to turn into a Republican version of Solyndra, or name the sort of progressive side of things when they have these big bills and then spend all this money on stuff and then it ends up being a waste. So is that just the Republican version of it? I mean, it's, you can see the concern there, but then at the same time, when you look at those permanent tax cuts and getting those in there, and again, cutting the green spending and the borders spending, I mean, those things are items that conservatives typically agree with. So other than opposing the general idea of having these massive bills with lots of different things in them instead of individually going after each one of these things, I think you're just not going to land in an obvious place.
Well, so you guys both raise something that would be the next step in all of this, other than the results of what happens with the big, beautiful bill that becomes law, which is the narrative. who's going to win the narrative coming up as it relates to the midterm elections. And so, and that's going to mean not just figuring out exactly what's inside this bill that will be good or bad, but beyond all of that, the key I think it's going to be the Republicans and Trump are going to pitch the pocketbook issues, in other words, the taxes, and they're going to pitch immigration. In other words, 10,000 new ICE officers. They're going to pitch a $2,200 child tax credit instead of $2,000, so $200 more. They're going, that type of thing. They're going to pitch the Trump baby fund, right? Where if you have a baby starting January of 2025 to 2028, you get $1,000 from the government to start that savings account. I can go on and on. So Trump and the Republicans think are going to pitch the pocketbook and immigration, two important issues for voters. Really, you can make the argument maybe the top two issues for voters. And then you have Democrats who are going to say, well, the Republicans are throwing not just Granny from the cliff, but pretty much everybody from the cliff, especially the poor, especially folks that, need Medicaid. So they're going to basically be saying, look, people are being taken off the Medicaid rolls. People are not getting their SNAP benefits. And so that's their argument. And then the question is, who's doing a better job? And John, to your point with the polls, Democrats typically do a better job messaging. They stick together and they're cohesive and they're coherent. I'm not saying their message is better, but their strategy for their messaging typically is better. And they speak as one. Republicans typically they have a hard time with messaging. Look what happened with Roe v. Wade and everything after that. So, you put all that together, and I think that's the battle going forward. I do want to say one last thing about President Trump and this July 4th deadline. Was it fascinating to you guys or not that this felt like at the end where, the clock was going to strike midnight and the government funding was going to run out, right? Like the government was going to shut down at midnight. Right. Like it had to get done. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, no, it didn't. No, it didn't. This is Trump's tour of Trump's brute force. I mean, Trump said, I want it on July 4th, and I want a signing ceremony, and I want fireworks, and I want the whole 9 yards. And guess what? He's going to get it. He's going to get it. They've moved this signing ceremony now to about 5 p.m. Eastern on Friday. I guarantee you the fireworks are coming afterwards. My guess is it might happen around dusk. And it's going to be one big glorious celebration the way the White House sees it. I mean, this is all Trump, guys. I mean, there was no deadline here. I mean, other than I actually kind of agree that there needs to be hard deadlines for Congress, regardless of a government shutting down or not, because otherwise Congress get nothing done. But having said that, there was no pressure to get it done on July 3rd to be signed by July 4th. But yet we've got to kind of get sucked into the vortex of Trump, where all of a sudden this has got to get done. Oh my gosh, they're keeping the vote open for 6.5 hours. I mean, it's like, well, just punt it for tomorrow. We'll do it right. It next week, the whole thing. But that never happened. Why? Because Trump wanted it to happen, and you better not cross Trump because He's got a big microphone and all that other stuff.
Yeah. I just wanted to chime in real quick, John, because I was thinking when Dave was responding about the narrative, and it's going to be interesting from the Democrat side of things, because I feel like they're going to be just set up. The things I've heard so far, throwing Granny out on the street, those sort of things. All the poor are going to be. I feel like these are sort of their Hall of Fame go-to when we've got nothing else. We just, say the Republicans hate the poor and all this other stuff. And if Trump and Republicans just have answers for that, like, no, this is just a work requirement or whatever their explanation is for those critiques, I don't know that that's going to land really well, because, I mean, it's just so old and tired, those arguments, that, I mean, does anyone really believe those anymore? You might not like the policy, but to sit there and try to paint Republicans as, oh, they just hate poor people and they just hate old people, I don't know. It just feels tired and old, like it won't work.
Well, specifically with some of those things, we'll see, won't we? I mean, if people do start losing their health care because of this bill, I imagine the Democrats will have those people front and center in these Bernie Sanders AOC town halls, or if Hakeem Jeffries is having a House floor speech, or at a news conference out in front of Capitol Hill. People, if there are people who are, and this bill will affect some of those people. I mean, the whole idea of this bill is to change things, and any piece of legislation is either aimed at keeping things exactly the same, or changing things in a major way, and that is gonna affect people. It remains to be seen how and to what degree, and you know what the American people are going to be able to see, and what they're going to have. Here's the bottom line: what they're going to have the attention span for. I mean, it could be one side has the right story and they might have the right people to trot out there. But you know, if it's not affecting enough Americans, and Americans, as we know, are concerned about their lives first, their families first, their dinner table, how much their gas costs, how able they are to buy a house. All those different things. That's what the American people really care about. That's what the last election told us. So I think the narrative that each side will spin on this over the coming weeks and months, certainly that will resonate with some people. But at the end of the day, like I think in a lot of these cases we'll see, right? We'll see what these things end up doing.
Yeah, and I think there's a timing aspect to it as well. Are we going to see it in Q3, Q4? Q1 of next year. I mean, I think that the timing's important here too, especially as relates to the midterm. So this can't go on too long.
Right.
No, I think that's a big part of it as well.
David, last thing on this, and really this isn't as much about the big, beautiful bill, but this is such a huge piece of legislation with all of these different things in here. Like you said, it essentially is funding the president's agenda. What's left for him to do? He's been in office for 7 months. Obviously, you're the president of the United States. Your phone's going to be always ringing off the hook. You're always going to have briefings. There's always going to be things on the international sphere that he's going to have to deal with: Israel, Iran, the Middle East, China, Russia, Ukraine, everything. But as far as even just kind of maybe focusing domestically, what's left on the president's plate here for the rest of his second term? It feels like this is kind of like the big boulder that you mentioned it. This is probably going to be his signature accomplishment here in his second term, and maybe his presidency as a whole. What's next for the president? What is he focused on? What is the White House going to be focused on next?
I think you're going to try to see some of those DOGE cuts codified into law. I think that's going to be the big thing, because remember, and I say it's not just DOGE cuts, but it's also just this rescissions package I talked about earlier. You know, there's a lot of money in Congress that does not get spent, and the White House wants to dial some of that back. So I think that's going to be a focus for sure. But I think you make a good point, John. I mean, this is the agenda. This is the whole enchilada. And at this point, it's kind of like, okay, they just put it in the oven, and on July 4th, they set it to 350, and they're baking it. And now we wait and see when the timer actually pops out, or what pops out of the oven and when, because everything else at this point, you know, it all hinges on this. Kind of like with Biden and his Inflation Reduction Act and all of that. You know, that was their big thing, which they'll argue turned the economy around to a degree. But I think the jury's still out on that for sure.
Dan, any thoughts on what you think the president will be working on here in his second term, or some of the things that he still has left to do that he hasn't accomplished?
I think, I mean, second what David said there, but I also think the foreign policy stuff, I think, is going to continue. I just don't see that going away. And I think that's, you know, particularly obviously Israel, Iran. I think that whole situation is going to be front and center for quite some time now. But then on the domestic side of things, I think it's, you know, the narrative game is going to be a big thing from this point in, because Trump knows that for the midterms, they have to go into the midterms strong. You know, from a Trump perspective, you do not want to have the typical midterm where, well, we won and we had a majority, and then, well, it's the way things go. I think he's looking at it thinking, no, we can actually win on some of these issues and then go into the midterm strong.
John, I just wanted to say two quick things. The tariffs, that will continue and that will be ongoing. So I think that's obviously going to be just kind of like how do I say this? This not a flat line, but it just continues for the next 3 years or so. It's going to be ebbing and flowing. But if the Trump administration can actually sign and ink some of these deals, we saw the one with Vietnam, we're seeing China come soon, then that's going to calm the stock market even more. I mean, the stock market's actually been pretty good, but I think it'll even be better because of all of that. And so I think that'll be a focus. And the other focus, just immediate, is Jerome Powell. And of course, the Fed chief. And, obviously Trump wants to replace him. They're looking for a replacement. So I think that's going to happen in the next week or two. So you've got that. And with that comes, will interest rates be cut? And of course, that was the whole idea here. Trump wanted those interest rates cut. Powell never did it because of the tariff instability. But if those interest rates get cut, then that's another potential boom to the economy. So there's that. And one last thing, just to point out on the edges, if you will, just like we saw with Ukraine inking that deal with the United States regarding the minerals there's always going to be an economic lens with Trump on every sort of foreign policy situation as well, whether it be something along the lines with Israel or with Russia or with Iran. There's always going to be like, look, if we're going to strike any sort of deal with anybody, we're going to get something for it, and we're going to get something financial for it. So I just feel like there's always going to be that as well. The economy and foreign policy tie together pretty nicely with the Trump administration.
All right, last thing here as we are approaching the 4th of July on Friday. First of all, happy Independence Day to everyone
Yes.
who are watching and listening. But of course, with the 4th of July come fireworks. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I have an issue with fireworks. I love going to watch a good fireworks display, and I think it's one of those things where once you have found in your community a great spot to watch really good fireworks, it's a unicorn type situation, because so often you try to go watch fireworks someplace, but it's incredibly crowded and it's hot and you can't find a good place to sit and you have obstructed view and the like. So if you can find a good place to watch fireworks, it's a lot of fun. But can we have a conversation about folks who set off their own fireworks? I maybe this is me being a little bit too fussy about this sort of thing. I despise having people in my neighborhood all around setting off their own fireworks. And you drive down the street and you see these huge warehouse container vehicles filled with fireworks, buy one, get 5 free. I mean, we're just giving fireworks to people, just handing them out to folks essentially so they can set off small explosives in their streets. As you can tell, I'm against this practice. I find it very annoying, but I might be in the minority.
Why?
I'd like to ask
you
open it up to the floor, Dan. I'm going to throw it your way first.
Listen, I know I've been chomping at the bit to get in here. Why do you hate America so much, John?
I do.
John Adams himself said it in his letter to Abigail. He said, "Hey, we're going to be celebrating this thing with guns and fireworks." I mean, he didn't say fireworks. I don't think they had that term back then, but essentially fireworks. For generations to come. So we're just doing, those of us who engage in private fireworks activities, which are perfectly legal, I think. I think we're just doing what John Adams and the founders wanted.
So I think that's funny. Yes, I would like to start with a disclaimer, legal and otherwise, which is follow your local ordinances, please.
Yeah,
sure. Yes.
Let's do that. Okay. We are the Christian Broadcasting Network after all. But having said that, did I just say but? But having said that, look, how do I say this, John? And love you to death. But here's the thing. Listen, how do I say this? People like to kind of blow things up. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just a thing. How do I explain it? My kids have done it. Okay, you want to know full truth serum? Am I the most comfortable with it? No, in the sense like I'm like one of these people going, okay, not too close to the grass, maybe not too close to grandma, maybe not too close to, the house, and maybe the neighbor's house. Like I'm thinking all of that. But I ultimately say go for it because, it's a rite of passage. It's kind of what we do as long as you're following the local ordinances. And, I'm okay with it. I think it goes without saying, let's be careful, right? Let's not put the grandkids next to the, the M80s. Okay. Let's not do that.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you're being reckless, and let's be honest, there are a lot of people that are being reckless. That's a problem. And so I think you have to kind of know the situation, know the people involved, understand, who's responsible and who's not. Like I can think of lots of people that I'd be like, ain't no way you're firing off any fireworks in the local neighborhood. And then there's others that are like, yeah, okay, they understand. They'll be careful. And yeah, could something go wrong? Sure. But I think you take your chances.
Yeah. I mean, I love that about America. I mean, I feel like on all days, this is the day that's quintessential America. Like, if you try to squelch like from a government perspective or local, or if you try to stop everyone from doing these things, like obviously within reason, but if you try to stop people, it just seems kind of sadly ironic if that were the case, right? Like celebrating our freedom, and it's like, well, wait a minute, let me check every local ordinance under existence here to have freedom, But so those things kind of maybe don't always go along. But it's just like
that's a good point, because by the way, let's be fully honest here. No one's checking their local ordinance.
No, nobody's checking the ordinance.
Shooting the rockets in the air.
This is an ask for forgiveness, not approval type situation for most people. That's really what's going on here. And I will implore those of you watching and listening, if you're going to set off your own fireworks, can we cut them off at around 10 o'clock at night? Like, do we need to do them?
Just trying to go to bed.
At 11, at midnight, pop, pop, pop. I mean, could we?
Yeah.
There's a line from The Simpsons from many years ago. Homer wanted to set off a bunch of fireworks, and the guy's telling him, "Hey, come celebrate the birth of your nation by blowing up a small part of it." It just didn't, never rang true to me. But
John, have you ever thought about visiting a foreign country on July 4th, just like every July 4th, just to kind of get away from it? Just to get away from it, John. Just think about it.
Are you urging me to do this, David?
Oh, no. We would still do navigating Trump from Bangladesh. That's fine.
Yeah, that's right. Over there, they just call it Friday as opposed to the 4th of July. All right, now that I've made myself eminently unpopular here among the listeners and the viewers, we will leave it there for this week. David Brody, Dan Andros, thanks for joining me once again on Navigating Trump 2.0. Happy 4th of July.
You too, John. Kaboom.
See you, John.